into my points of positive material, because I think most of it rebuts quite clearly what we've heard coming out of the government team today. But first, on this notion of free choice and this happiness factor, we find it funny on the opposition. Me and Ruben were actually talking about this last week, at the fact that the Amish in America, on their Rumspringers, frequently engage in using drugs and experience this faulty happiness that the government team is describing. But on this issue of finding happiness in reality, and they talk about wanting to be able to find happiness in actual reality. But we find that in Brazil, by law, there are areas in the Amazon you cannot go because groups there have different local groups in the Amazon have actually found happiness in their reality, in their isolation. And Brazil respects this so much that you can't intrude this isolation. You can't intrude their happiness, their individual reality that they're experiencing in these unique areas in the Amazon. So we find that it's actually codified in the law, this notion of respecting these different realities that exist for people throughout the world. And so we think that the notion being advanced by the government team that there's one reality and that you have to be able to find happiness in that reality is arrogant and merely misses the fact that people are able to find things that the government team just hasn't experienced. But what we want to go today is talking about the difference between religious tradition and religious law, because we believe that this is the fundamental thing that has been missed in the debate today. Because we find that the Amish in America denounce technology and live separate out of preference, and I'll get into the difference here in a moment. Because they believe the scripture, that iron sharpens iron, and therefore separation enhances their ability to encourage developing a relationship with God and living a Christian life. But this is a preference. This is a unique circumvention of their dogmatic ways that they garner because Christianity is based upon giving praise to God. And the Amish are comforted by the scripture that, if you raise up a child in the way that he or she should go, then when he or she grows older, she won't depart from it. But what about Islam? In Islam, how do you live a good life as a Muslim? Is it to be the salt of the earth? Or is it to be the light of Christ? No, these are the things that the Amish believe. It is to follow the 5 pillars. It is to pray 5 times a day. It is to submit to Allah and believe that Muhammad was his prophet and to go to Mecca. So what is the fundamental difference that I'm identifying? Islam is predicated upon submission to Allah and to the law. And thus we find where these isolated communities begin to differ. In many isolated Muslim communities, religious law is intimately intertwined with civil law. And this is the key difference with the Amish community. You can't be thrown in jail in an Amish community for operating outside of the Levitical law, or not perfectly, emulating the life of Jesus Christ. But you may certainly be punished within the confines of the law for not maintaining the standards of being a good Muslim. And this isn't a bad thing. This is merely an example of a fundamental difference, because in Islam you find that within the Sharia, your life at home is your life at church. There is no fundamental difference. And I'll take a POI at this time. Sure.
Yeah, not that we would object to the idea of Islam also having this comfort, but this is completely different, because even the Amish that you're talking about also can punish their own people and shun them and do exactly the same thing with those exact same beliefs that they hold dear. There is no difference by your own admission.
But what I'm identifying is the difference. Between having your civil law and your religious law intimately intertwined, not just in practice, but inside the individual, the internal experience that the individual experiences. And here's what I'm identifying. So what is the consequence of this? We find that what the government team introduces is a contradiction into the lives of individuals and the lives of communities that otherwise was not present. We find that happiness is not in the world. There's a reason that Thoreau went into the wilderness to live isolated and find happiness.
Okay, sure.
Because what we find is that the government team isn't enhancing the lives of individuals. They're not providing insight. They're interrupting the clarity of mind and peace that exists in the consistency that isolated communities enjoy. We find the motion is like the imperialists who brought civility to the native people of South America and relieved those animals in Africa by enslaving them for 400 years. And we find that and what happened to those native people in South America when they brought civility? We found that the population went from 25 million and in 40 years was decreased to 8 million. And we see that such happiness and such civility was brought to the Indians of this region. We find that the government team needs to recognize that so long as no civil rights abuses occurred, they have no right, no need, and no legitimacy to invade the souls of individuals and torment the communities of the earth. Because, I'll take it, POI.
Should a North Korean peasant who is happy in North Korea have the right to exit the country?
That's not what we're talking about here. It's not the difference between isolation and being forced to remain in the community is different. What this motion has nothing to do with the type of civil law that a country enacts on its people. What we're talking about is when the religious traditions and the religious laws of a particular isolated community are such that we find that they prefer to live in isolation, and they do things in such a way that we find that they have no interaction with the outside world. That is not the same thing as in North Korea, where the country has enacted laws. The laws that North Korea puts on its people have nothing to do with the Hindu that live in an isolated region or the Confucianists who live in isolated regions in North Korea. We find that these things are done as a result of the community and have nothing to do with the national law. So what have we brought before you today? We've demonstrated quite clearly that the government team has invaded the minds and is attempting to invade the minds and souls of individuals, and this is what we stand to defend today.